Okay, I was telling you about the vertical pin. We have three different vertical pins. This is a 3-dot vertical. You have the 4-dot vertical. And we have the 5-dot vertical pin. These pins are used on different bows with different speed. The 3-dot vertical. That was basically designed for a slower shooting bow, a bow with an arrow speed of 250 and slower. The concept behind it is you've got exactly 1/4 inch gap between the pins. You can sight in the bottom pin like at 40 yards. Your 30 and 20 is automatically set. Those speed bows typically have a 1/4 inch gap between their pins. All I did was preset that gap. The 5-dot vertical. It's made for your faster shooting bows. It's made for arrow speeds 260 and faster. You got an 1/8 inch gap between these fiber optic dots. The concept behind it is you sight in the bottom one at 60 yards, you got approximately 10 yards between your other pins already preset. And then I have the 4-dot vertical. It's just like 3-dot vertical, besides it has an extra pin. Now, this is my favorite. This is the one that I use. I shoot the Z7. My arrow speed is around 285, 290 on that particular bow. Well, I've got my top pin sighted dead in at 25 yards. My second one's on at 40, my third one's on at 55, the bottom one's on at exactly 70 yards. Now, the way I determine that distance is I sighted my top pin in at 25 yards on the ground. The reason being, with my arrow speed, when I get up in the deer stand 14 feet off the ground and higher, I can shoot that one pin from 0 to 35 yards and not change anything. But to determine that distance, like I said, the top one I sighted in at 25, the second one I backed up 40 yards and shot the second pin. Well, it just so happened that second pin was dead on at 40. That let me know I had 15 yards between my fiber optic dots. Let's just say it would have shot low. Well, I would have needed to move in closer to the target to determine exactly what that distance was. If I'd shot high, I needed to back up until I figured out exactly what that distance is. Whatever the distance works out to be between your top and second pin, you'll have the same distance between your second, third, and fourth. That's the way the vertical pins work. The way you adjust the vertical pins. You got one screw right here on the main mounting bracket. This lets you adjust it from left to right. On the front, you've got one screw. You loosen it up, that lets you move the whole sight housing up and down. Now, the reason you're moving these pins, the pins are tied together. So anytime you move that sight housing, you're moving all of them the same exact distance. Just like the 5-dot, I told you would have approximately 10 yards in between them. That's the reason why. When I slide this front housing up or down, that automatically moves all of them that same distance. Now, when you get beyond 25 yards, say 30 yards, the least little movement on your front sight is going to go a long ways. The least little movement. Now, let's go into the setup right quick, okay? The rear pin. The rear pin does the same thing. I don't care which pin configuration you're using, which sight you're using. The rear pin sets up identically the same way. First thing we're going to do is we're going to mount this sight to a bow. The way we're going to do this, you got 5 different set of mounting holes. Those mounting holes is determined by the brace height on your bow. It's going to determine which hole you use. It lets you slide it in and out. Now, on a cable slide bow, you need at least 1.5 inch clearance between the back of the bracket and your cables. You don't want anything hitting the back of the bracket when the bow's fired. The next thing is, on the roller guide system, it doesn't really matter as long as this part's not touching your rollers or the cables. You're in good shape, the back of it. All right. Now, we figured out which set of hose we needed to mount the sight in. Let's just say it's center hose. So we mount it to a riser. The first step in the process is we've got to get this rear pin set to our anchor point. Now, the way we do this, if you've already using a bow that's got a peep sight in it, it's real easy. These two screws on the outside here, you loosen those up, that lets you move this tail section up and down. Your rear pin will move up and down. You got one screw on the bottom that tightens the rear pin up. You loosen it up and it allows you to slide it left and right. Now, first thing you're going to do is loosen the two screws up and you line this rear pin up with your bowstring to start out with. With your peep sight in the string, all you're going to do is center the top part of that Y in the center of your peep sight at full draw. Once you do that, we just got you to your anchor point. That's it. Tighten these two screws up. Now your peep comes out. If you're using a kisser button, get rid of it too. You're no longer going to need them. Next step, the rear pin's going to offset your bowstring. Depending on how you anchor, it's going to depend on which side of the string the rear pin sits on. It can either sit to the left side or to the outside of the string. For you guys that have an eye dominance problem, you can actually slide this pin over far enough to where you can see through it with your dominant eye. So basically, if you're a right-handed shooter, left eye dominant, you can still use this sight on your right-handed bow, but sight it with your left eye, just by sliding the rear pin out far enough where you can sight with your left eye. Okay, once you get this rear pin adjusted to your anchor point and where it's comfortable for you to look through, at that time you let off your bow. I want you to close your eyes. Bring your bow back to full draw. Go to your anchor point or where you think your anchor point is. Once you get there, open your eyes up. You ought to be able to see through that rear pin with no problem. If you can't, stop and readjust it to where you can. Do that a couple times to make sure you got it correct. Once you got that correct, here's the way the front sight works. You're going to bring this front sight over till it lines up with the back sight. If you're using more than one pin, you're going to line up on your longest yardage pin. Let's just say we're using the 4-dot vertical, and I'm going to shoot all 4 dots. When I line this up, this bottom dot is going to line up in that little pocket of the Y pin. Now, and that's at full draw. Here's the other thing. If you're torquing your bow the least little bit, you're going to see it. If you have those pins out of alignment, you'll know it when you draw back, because you'll actually have to twist the riser to get the 2 points to line up. If you catch yourself doing that, stop, realign the front sight. Now, with the bottom dot lined up in the Y, we're going to start sighting in at 10 yards, and I will show you this here later on in the video. But we're going to start out at 10 yards. We're going to keep the bottom one in the Y. From this point on, that bottom one stays in the Y. I don't care what distance you're shooting. It never comes out. With a vertical pin set up, vertical pin only, you can actually line up on your longest yardage and sight in your short yardage pin. The reason being, like I told you earlier, when you move a sight housing, you're moving all of them the same distance. Alright, so we got the bottom lined up in the Y. We put the top one on the 10-yard target where we want to hit, and we release. We shoot 2 arrows. Those arrows may be high, low, left, or right. All you're going to do is chase those arrows with the front sight only. That's it. You move this box assembly the same direction that arrow hit. Once you do that, shoot 2 more arrows. See if you're on the bullseye. Now, in some cases, doesn't happen often, but in some cases, you will get to adjusting this sight and you'll notice that you're shooting way to the left. Well, you move this front sight housing out to the left enough now to where you're actually having to torque your riser to get the 2 points to line up. If you catch yourself doing that, just stop. Take the rear pin. It doesn't take much. Move it the same direction your arrow's hitting. So if your arrow's hitting to the left, we're going to take the rear pin, we're going to move it a fraction to the left. Tighten it back up. All you did was allow yourself a little bit more adjustment on the front box assembly to be able to adjust the sight in on the target. Some cases you end up getting the rear pin too close to your bowstring, and that's what happens. Once we got it in at 10 yards, depending on the speed of the bow, your arrow speed